Okay, well, welcome back. What a great morning we've had so far. Last night, I think I mentioned in one of the eras that we were talking about that in the last several years, when you look at phase 1 to phase 3 in a rollover study, there have been 10 FOP clinical trials, which is amazing. And so we are excited to have Dr. Hsiao here with us this morning to talk about clinical trials. And then after his talk, he is going to be joined by representatives of the companies running these trials, as well as other investigators, to take your questions. So with that, welcome to the stage, Ed.
All right, thank you, Michelle. So what I'm going to do today for this section here is talk a little bit about introduction to clinical trials. I know that we have a couple of people here who are new and first-time attendees, and so what I thought I would do is at the beginning just have a brief overview about clinical trials, things like that to think about, and then I'm going to do a very quick summary about the current status of the different clinical trials that are ongoing. That data is based on publicly available data, so if there are specific questions, we will direct that to the panel afterwards. Okay, so same disclosures, and it's important to note for this one especially. All right, so I think I used this one last time. I'll try to use this one this time for this side of the room. I am a clinical trial investigator for a number of different studies in FOP and non-FOP too. Okay, so what are clinical trials? So clinical trials are research studies that are really meant to really try to involve people and evaluate the efficacy and safety of different types of drugs and devices that we use in medicine. The idea is to really look at these new interventions, and the goal of the clinical trial is to determine the safety and effectiveness. What's absolutely critical for this is participant involvement, and these participants play an active role not only in their own healthcare, but also to help us understand how these medicines work, what are the potential side effects, and what are the aspects about the use of the medication that we need to think about. And so clinical trials are really an essential part of the development of new and improved medical interventions. And without them, there is really no way to advance our ability to treat different types of conditions. So when we think about clinical trials, there are actually a couple of key milestones. So milestone 1 is really being able to identify the drug, different types of devices. You've heard, like from the previous talk, that there are numerous ways that this can come through. Some of it could be through cell screening, that somebody has a cell model of a disease and trying to identify different drugs that might affect a particular pathway. There are other strategies that might use mice, that you test specific genes or gene targets, or clinical observation, where patients who are seen in the clinic, there's something unusual that you see, and you're like, oh, well, maybe we can mimic that with a drug, and that will be one of the discussions tomorrow with Dr. Kaplan about the MMP9 inhibitors. Usually there's an initial assessment, basically assessing the safety and potential side effects of new drugs. This is typically done through rigorous testing, starting in cells, then in animal models, and then ultimately in the phase 1 in humans. And that's typically sort of this milestone 3, where you're trying to start to determine the optimal dosage. What is the administration, the delivery methods? How do you actually bring this medicine to a patient? These were typically what are called phase 1 and phase 2 trials, and then eventually we get to like phase 2 and phase 3 trials, where you're really trying to determine the efficacy of this new medication and comparing it to placebo or standard of care. And in the end, the hope is that you'll have an approval, some sort of drug approval, and you'll hit something like milestone 5, where you're really trying to gather the data to really support the regulatory approval and inform the healthcare decision maker that this medication or this potential therapy is actually valuable for that particular population. So we talk about these phases. There's the phase 1 through 4 for the clinical trials. This is an FDA system that has been adopted by many other places around the world. Phase 1 clinical trials is basically the first time a medication is being given to a patient. Really, the idea behind this is to say, what is the safe dosage and what are the potential side effects? And these are going to be a small cohort of patients, typically healthy volunteers, but not always healthy volunteers. But these are the first time that the medication goes into a patient. Phase 2 trials, these are clinical trials. These undergo efficacy and safety evaluations. This is a slightly larger study. It's typically with participants really trying to understand that particular target condition and what types of doses are going to be needed. How do you get the medication there? How can you take the medication? Or what are the side effects in that particular disease situation? Phase 3 trials are what we often call registration trials. These are larger scale trials. The idea behind this is to thoroughly assess the drug efficacy and safety. And what this is important to do is this gives you the basic data to compare to existing treatments, and it will inform the basic approval and marketing application process to the regulatory agencies. And then hopefully, if the drug actually gets approved, it moves into stage 4. And stage 4 is what we call post-approval or long-term safety. Typically, these are going to be things like registries, different types of long-term studies or long-term observations to really make sure that the drug is safe over a much longer period, a period that is longer than what is actually feasible for this whole process of getting approval, right? Because if you wanted to wait and say, and this is actually one of the reasons why you'll see some drugs get approved first and then they get withdrawn from the market later, is because during the practical time frame of trying to get approval, I mean, this process from phase 1 all through here, you're looking at potentially like 10 years. And so, that is a relatively short time in a human being's lifetime. And so being able to have this expanded data is actually really critical. So there are potential benefits in participating in a clinical trial. You have potential access to potential treatments. So you have to remember these are potential treatments. These are not actual treatments at that time that are not yet available on the market. You get very close supervision. So if any of you have participated in a trial or know people who have participated in the trial, they are always coming to see us, right? So there's a lot of patient contact. It's a lot of effort. It is a very big ask, but part of the benefit is that you are under very close observation during that period of time. And it really does help to contribute to the advancement of medical knowledge and to improve treatment, not only for that condition, but oftentimes for related conditions. There are risks in participating in clinical trials. There can be unknown side effects. So clinical trial participants might be exposed to something that we don't exactly know what might happen in that particular situation. So an example of this would be the palovarotene with the early growth plate closure. That was not really expected. There was some mouse data that didn't seem to quite correlate that initially, but obviously in the trial that became an issue. There's also a placebo effect. So many of the studies will have a placebo arm. It's interesting, if you look at the studies just in general and patient sort of disease responses, the placebo effect can actually be quite powerful. So people have estimated this as they're roughly about 30% to 50% in some of the pain studies. And so the placebo arm of these studies is actually really important. But if you're thinking about participating, you have to balance is that some patients may receive active drug, but other patients may receive inactive placebo. And you won't necessarily know because these are often blinded. There is a potential for harm that might happen. Clinical trials carry risks. These are untested medications. We try to, the field tries to check as much as they can beforehand, but mice and monkeys are not humans. So we just don't know because sometimes things will show up in humans that don't show up in other animal systems. It can sometimes be inconvenient and there can be discomfort. There's blood draws that are involved, that you have to occur on a regular basis. Some of the studies, we have people come on site multiple times, every 2 weeks, every 4 weeks. That can be a potentially big ask. And so there's sometimes these challenges that are associated with those, just not, going to those, but also the logistics. If you have a child, that means that the parent has to take time off from work. That can actually be a big deal. And it's possible, at the end of all of this, is that it's not efficacious, that it doesn't actually work for that, what you're looking for. And unfortunately, that is part of the reason why we do this, is because we try to get as much information beforehand, to say that a medication has the highest, has a good chance of being efficacious, but we won't necessarily know exactly how efficacious it is until we test it in patients. So one of the questions that we often come up with in the clinic is, how do you find clinical trials? So clinical trials, one of the best resources is this clinicaltrials.gov. It is a mandatory registration for anybody who's doing clinical trials, and so you'll find pretty much every single clinical trial on there now. Most journals, when they publish, they require that you have a clinicaltrials.gov registration number anyway, too, and so that's other impetus to actually have that in there. For FOP in particular, the IFOPA website is actually very nicely curated and provides a lot of information about clinical trials there. And then oftentimes it'll be patients referred by clinical providers. There's our trials matching specific criteria, which you can search for based on the like the clinicaltrials.gov, and other informed and engaged patients. You might hear about it through social media or through other people. It's just like, oh, well, I've heard about this trial. This is something that I want to try. Okay, this is the IFOPA website for clinical trials. Just a screenshot from the top of it. Again, this is a really great site for you to look at if this is something that you're interested in. A lot of the stuff that I've talked about here, just going the overview of the clinical trials, there's actually videos and text there that can be very helpful as you go through and think about things. Okay, so one of the key things about clinical trials, we sometimes hear about clinical trials, I do the air quotes, that may not actually fit what we would call the formal definition of an appropriate clinical trial. There are a couple of key things that everybody who wants to participate in a clinical trial should really look out for. These things include the right to withdraw. There should be no coercion behind this. This needs to be a voluntary process. You need to be able to say, I want to be part of this. This is an opt-in, not an opt-out. Ethical and regulatory guidelines, the studies need to follow all of these guidelines. In the United States, we have a pretty good system, with the clinical trials, with strict guidelines, IRB approvals, things like that. You want to make sure that, when you're talking about this for a clinical trial, that there is actually IRB approval that has been obtained. And a key aspect is also informed consent. So patients need to be able to provide informed consent before any participation, so any particular event. And so what you will sometimes see is that you'll do the consent by telemedicine first, before any other steps are actually taken, and then we bring you on site, and then you do the consent again in person, and so you'll oftentimes see these consenting processes occurring multiple times. Okay? But patients' rights, protections, and safety, the patient's safety is absolutely paramount. That is the highest, most important part of a clinical trial, and that needs to be very clear in the design. And this is from the NIH. Basically, informed consent is the ethical and legal requirement that a patient or research participant is fully informed about the potential risks and benefits of a medical intervention or research study before deciding to participate. Okay? And these risks and benefits are not just related to the drug. It's like what happens to your data, what happens to your privacy, and things like that. Okay? All right, so next section that I'm going to do is just a very brief update on the active clinical trials and actually studies, not trials, studies in FOP. And that I raise that because there is a distinction. There's clinical trials, which are going to be testing of a medication, and clinical studies, where it might be something like an observational study, where they are not giving you the medication, but they are trying to understand what is actually going on. Okay? So again, you can tell I do a lot of disclaimers, unfortunately. Clinical trials disclaimers, the medications discussed are obviously not going to be regulatory agency approved yet, hopefully. The discussion today is not an endorsement or a recommendation against the use of any of these in any particular patient or participation in the clinical trial. There are potential off-label medications that are discussed today, and if you are thinking about this, you really have to talk about this with your clinicians and your research study team. And we talked a little bit about the other stuff before. Okay. So I like to think about, when we talk about different types of therapies or off-label therapies or clinical trials, I like to think about it in the context of where are we actually targeting in the FOP process, right? So you have everything from the FOP mutation, where the idea would be to block the receptor or the mutant receptor's function, or block the BMP signaling, everything to a more general process where, blocking cartilage and bone formation. And I add on here one interesting point, which I think was brought up earlier this morning about, where are we in the marathon? Not only do we need to think about treatments, right, for preventing the new heterotopic ossification and the symptoms in FOP, but we also need to think about the patients who currently have FOP. What can we do to actually resect, the surgical intervention to resect the heterotopic ossification? And we're not really there yet. But this type of set of structures, I think, is useful for thinking about how we look at the clinical trials. So the first group that we're going to talk about are the kinase inhibitors. These are drugs that directly target the ACVR1 receptor and try to decrease the activity of the ACVR1 receptor. There's the activin A inhibitor, the garetosmab from Regeneron, which is actually targeting activin A, which is the ligand that binds to the receptor. And then we'll talk briefly about MMP9, which is andecaliximab. I'm going to mess up that pronunciation, and I will apologize in advance. But I will tell AshiBio, you guys picked a very difficult name. So, all right. So I'm going to start with the easy ones, which are the studies that are actually not enrolling at the moment. And I'm also going to tell Ipsen they picked a really hard name, too. Fidrisertib, which is IPN 60130. It was previously known as the BLU 782, which was from Blueprint Pharmaceuticals. And so this trial is sponsored by Ipsen. It's the Falcon trial. This is a phase 2 clinical trial to assess the efficacy of IPN 60130. We have the Part A, Part B, and Part C. So this is basically a 1-year trial on placebo-controlled and then switching to open label. This is now fully enrolled. There are 113 participants at ages 5 and above. And the goal, the Part A period should end in probably August of 2025 and study completion in August of 2029. And this is the NCT number if you want to go and look at the clinicaltrials.gov. So this one is fully enrolled. The other medication is rapamycin. There were some questions about this a little bit earlier because this is an off-label medication use. This is a study that is sponsored by Kyoto University. This one, we don't have a ton of information on. It actually had started enrollment in 2018. The main study was a placebo-controlled phase 2 trial of the drug, basically for 24 weeks, followed by an open-label extension. And unfortunately, we actually don't have a lot of information about this. It was 24 patients. I'm told that it was fully enrolled. It was ages 6 to 59, but we don't have an update yet in terms of the results. The other trial that is currently closed is garetosmab. This is from Regeneron. This one, the start date was in 2022. This is the Optima trial, which is the phase 3 trial. It is a randomized placebo control. It was designed as a 1-to-1-to-1, so there's a low dose and a high dose and a placebo. It's double-blinded, and the patients actually do 56 weeks, so basically 1 year worth of treatment, and then switch to an open-label extension. It is currently fully enrolled with 63 subjects, and it's active, not recruiting. And there were a couple of key inclusion-exclusion criteria for this one. You had to have FOP, had to have disease activity, CAGES score of greater than 19, and then the key exclusion criteria was that there was no significant concomitant disease or bisphosphonates. Okay, and then saracatinib. This is sponsored by the Amsterdam University Medical Center. And specifically, this is a study in Europe. So this was open to European participants. This one started in 2019. The study design, enrollment is fully completed as of 2024. And the goal was to measure heterotopic ossification using low-volume whole-body CT scans. There was a 6-month randomized control phase, double-blinded phase, and then a 12-month open-label extension, and is also active in that recruiting. And again, this was for patients who are ages 16 to 65 with FOP, and then it's pretty similar exclusion criteria, significant concomitant illnesses, and the use of bisphosphonates. And I should point out that you'll hear the use of bisphosphonates in a couple of different studies. It's because it interferes with the imaging for the PET CT scans. It's not because of interactions with the medication. All right, Insight. Okay, so also Insight has a difficult name. Yeah, I think I'll have to ask you guys at some point about how you pick these names. But yeah, so Insight, I'm going to just call it the INCB drug. Their progress trial is a phase 2 trial. Enrollment for this one is also completed. Actually, I made a mistake. It's 60 subjects, not 63 subjects. And the study started with their first participant in 2022. This is a phase 2 randomized double-blinded placebo-controlled trial for 24 weeks, followed by an open-label extension for 52 weeks. And this one, again, basically adults and adolescents, so greater than 12 years of age, diagnosed with FOP. Okay. So there are some studies that are open for enrollment or opening for enrollment soon, and so I thought I would touch base on that really quickly. And so this one, again, if we just go back and think about sort of the pathways that we're interested in, we're looking specifically about the MMP9 inhibitor. And so this is the andecaliximab from Hsiao. And I'm just going to show you a little bit of data. This was actually from Dr. Kaplan's paper. He is going to tell you the whole story on it, but I think I wanted to give you a little bit of background on this. One of the things that had been shown was that there was a decrease in MMP9 activity in the patient with FOP that seemed to be resistant to the heterotopic ossification. And most critically, that if you use a mouse model and you knocked out the MMP9, you could actually see reduction in the new heterotopic ossification that was formed, and an antibody that was used to target MMP9, which is not the same antibody here, but that is being tested, but a very similar antibody, was able to reduce the heterotopic ossification. So this tells you that the pathway is relevant for FOP, and that there is a potential therapy by blocking the MMP9 activity. And so this particular trial is testing the antibody against MMP9, which is called the andecaliximab. There are currently there are 2 parts that are planned. There's the part 1 and the part 2. The part 1 is really sort of a run-in study, and there's actually 2 subparts to that. And there's part 1A and 1B. 1A is a PET CT scan. Basically, patients will be randomized to low dose or high dose of the andecaliximab. There's no placebo at this stage, and just to really sort of test to see what's going on, they get 13 weeks of that, and then they switch to open label. And then there's one that is for younger patients that would be, again, high dose and low dose, but this one actually does have placebo. And this one does have, sorry, wrong side. Sorry, that is the main study, which is not open yet. That will be determined afterwards. But the second one, the part 1B, is not, again, no placebo, but this is only looking at flare-ups, so there's no PET CT that is associated with that. And again, it's a 13-week design followed by the open label portion. So once this information has been gathered, then Hsiao will be determining what the next steps would be, potentially to open up the part 2 study, which would be the registration study, and that one does have placebo, so sorry about that. Okay. And this one's eligibility criteria will need FOP diagnosis, excuse me, active disease within the past year, and so there will be a couple of factors for there. And then basically any ACVR1 mutation or pathogenic variant. Importantly, this one's CAGES score, the score requirement is less than 19, less than or equal to 19. And people will need to be able to do the whole body CT scanning, as well as any of the other imaging depending on the part, and basically no confounding or chronic diseases that might be an issue. All right, so I'm going to just mention really quickly canakinumab. We talked a little bit about that. This is not a clinical trial. This is at UCSF. This is sponsored by NIH, so this is our NIH R01. If you're interested in looking at it, it is available publicly on there. We have not registered with the clinicaltrials.gov yet. That is in process. This is not a clinical trial because we are not prescribing medication. So we are actually going to only observe patients who get that. And as we had discussed earlier this morning, the idea behind canakinumab is an antibody that blocks, that absorbs the IL-1 beta, basically try to prevent the inflammatory process. And it is a monthly injection, and it is subcutaneous. And we had talked again a little bit about this earlier this morning, but as a quick recap, there have been at least 4 patients who have received canakinumab that we've been able to track in a lot of detail. And these particular patients had very significant decreases in heterotopic, in flare activity. What we do not know is what happens in heterotopic ossification. And so this particular study design is that if a patient is being considered for canakinumab, they would start in the study. We would actually get a bunch of baseline information. Then once they actually start in the canakinumab, they would come on site for a CT scan. 1 year later, we would do a second CT scan. There are assessments in between. And the goal behind this is to see whether canakinumab actually has ability to decrease heterotopic ossification. The goal is to plan opening in 2025. A key thing behind this is that you have to have severe FOP. So that's like unremitting flares or flares that have been ongoing in multiple joints for at least 3 months. Okay. There are a couple of other studies that are coming up and available. One is palovarotene. Palovarotene is the FDA-approved medication, Sohonos, that is used, that had previously gone through phase 2 and phase 3 studies. There's a long-term follow-up registry with Ipsen that is already started in Canada and is hopefully going to be rolled out soon in the United States. And information about palovarotene, if this is something that you're thinking about, that can be found over on the palovarotene website. And then, again, just as a reminder, a lot of the resources that you're looking for, especially if you're thinking about clinical trials, that will be on the IFOPA website for clinical trials. And making sure that, the informed consent process, this is also very critical, making sure that you understand about the risks and benefits for each of the studies. That's absolutely vital as you consider whether or not participating in a clinical trial is right for you. So with that, I'm going to stop, and I think we have our panel. So this will be representatives from each of the different studies, and they'll be able to help answer specific questions about their individual studies. Or correct me if I'm wrong.
Nope.
So.
That's correct. So yes, we will invite those of you. Thank you, Dr. Hsiao. So wherever you would like to sit, and then we will have, joining us on stage will be Sue Moran from Insight, Dr. Susan Rhee from Regeneron, and Dr. Fei Shi from Ipsen, and Dr. Deborah Winkert from Ashibio. And then on the power of the internet, we will also have joining us from Amsterdam University Medical Center, Dr. Marilise Eekhoff, and Dr. Vincent Verheij. Okay, very good. Everyone's settled. Okay. So this is our Q&A time. So if you have questions, there is the mic over on the left, right behind Rico Gonzalez, and then there's also Catherine is in the room. Dr. Pignolo has a question. Catherine, I was just going to say, Catherine is running the mic in the rust color jacket. So we'll go to Dr. Pignolo first, and then we also have some other questions.
Thanks. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I just wanted to qualify something with regard to Stop FOP. Ed, on your chart, you said they were recruiting, had completed recruitment of 40. I believe the number is actually 17, but since we have Vincent online, maybe he can qualify that for us, and maybe just for everybody's information.
Thanks, that would be good.
Tell everyone why, some of the obstacles that maybe resulted in a delayed and lower recruitment than expected.
Absolutely. Marlies, do you want to fill in?
Okay, you can go. Go ahead, Vincent.
Okay. Good question, Bob. So, yes, we only have 18 enrolled subjects, of whom 17 are actively participating. So you do have your numbers right. We started in 2019. First inclusion was in 2020 due to the COVID pandemic. And it's both the pandemic and Brexit as well that severely interfered with our enrollment. It's not a high number. We are completely aware of that. It's really difficult to get participants in an investigator-initiated study. Then again, we're in exploratory phase 2A trial. So we're trying to see if the drug that we're testing is safe, and we're trying to find some efficacy signals. But we're primarily still focusing on safety, and we expect to be able to do that with the amount of patients that we currently enrolled.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else from here? If not, I did have a question that was submitted prior. One of the questions was, after the trial, will I be able to find out which arm of the study I was in, and if not, why? Ed, do you want to take that one?
I get to punt this because it
You wanna punt?
depends on the trial.
Okay.
So I will let the other people talk.
Sure. I think as part of our clinical trial, as Ed mentioned, it's a double blind up to a certain point. But after the study completes, as part of our process is we do let the patients know what arm they will be in so that they then have that opportunity to evaluate their experience. But we preserve that blinding till the study is complete to protect data integrity.
Okay, and you're Dr. Fei Shi with the Falcon trial.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, sorry.
Yes.
I should have had you all introduce yourself first. Sue, did you want to go next?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, you can. I'm Sue Moran from Insight, and our company is exactly the same. We are committed to provide that information to patients who've participated in our study, but it's after the conclusion of the study.
Hi, Susan Ree from Regeneron. Same. The study needs to complete. Because while the trials are ongoing, as we all noted, they are double-blinded. So oftentimes, actually, the clinical team, even at the companies, don't even know, because we need to be able to accurately assess the data and make sure that we're making a fair and unbiased view of the data.
Is it on? Okay. Deb Weinkert, Hsiao. And I think that this is standard, that participants will learn. But as with the other trials, there is a open label extension in which everybody's on drugs, so that's not going to be a mystery. Our part one, everybody's on drug anyway, and it is 2 different levels, neither of which is actually high, because prior trials that use the drug use much higher levels. But the thing that I think ends up being disappointing to participants who really want to learn as soon as they're done is if they are somebody who enrolled early, the trial might not be over for the entire cohort for years and years. So for the integrity of the study, all sponsors end up keeping that information from themselves and or from everybody else until they've really analyzed everything so that they don't get biased by their analysis.
Yeah, that's a great point. If you were the first one in, you might be waiting quite a while to find out where you were. And Vincent or Marilee, Dr. Ekoff, would either one of you want to answer for the stop FOP? Is it the same for you that afterwards you will inform patients once your trial is closed and the data is reviewed?
Of course. Of course.
Of course. Okay, great. Scott, did you have a question?
Yeah, just a couple. So in regards to the Falcon trial, you put the chart up and it says that after the first year, some of them will get a low dosage, some of them will get a high dosage. Why not a high dosage for all of them?
I think that's part of the question that we're trying to address, is whether the what dose is appropriate. Because when we look at the, you can always think, oh, maybe more is better, but it may not be safe. And so we really need to determine what is the safe dose and what is the efficacious dose. And then when we come to decide what is the dose that we would then seek approval, it's going to be a balance of what we see in safety as well as what we see in efficacy. And that's why in our first year, we have placebo, low dose, and high dose. And then in the second year, those that were on placebo actually then gets reassigned to low dose or high dose so that we can add that to the data that we collect for both of the doses. If we then, after we analyze the data, determine that one dose is the best dose, then we would switch everybody to that dose. But until we get that information, we have to keep the two doses going.
Gotcha. My other question is, with this being a, I guess this would be for all rare diseases, not just a FOP, but from a pharmaceutical standpoint, with there only being 7,300 people in the world that have it, 900 that are known, my concern is what makes it profitable for these pharmaceutical companies to continue to make this drug. If with so many, if they're not going to make money, then they can't do it.
That's a really good, astute question. And I think part of it is we have the identify patients, but it is also really critical because we know from the prevalence it's about 1 in a million, so there's a lot of unidentified patients out there. And so I think part of our strategy is also then to find these patients that previously, because there was no therapy, they don't really care to get diagnosed. And so that would be one of our strategy to then be able to bring these medicines to market.
Well, and so for the Falcon trial, an example, is there another use besides treating FOP that they're looking into that would make this more marketable for someone to do it?
That is definitely something we're looking at. And so, and I think this is the same for all our companies, as we try to look at that molecule and see what else we can do.
Okay.
But
Thank you.
You are incredibly astute
Thank
audience
you.
member.
Thank you.
Pat?
So I'd just like to make a comment toward that. If I'm recalling a conversation that I had with Dr. Kaplan before, there's also heterotopic ossification that happens as a result of traumatic injury. I think he spoke victims of severe blasts and things from war. And so I think for some of the companies that there's potential application for that for other types of heterotopic ossification that are not FOP.
Felicia?
Shorten this mic here. So a couple of questions, but I think they're short questions. One, I'm thinking about stop FOP right now, but it's actually true generally, is that for trials that are being conducted outside the US, when they are complete, is that just the FDA would review those findings and then determine, or would those results need to be replicated in the US, or how does that go with trials conducted abroad in the US FDA?
So when we conduct the trial, it's global. So for example, the Falcon conducted the trial in 14 countries. What we do when we submit the data to the FDA is we submit all the data, so from all the countries, all the patients. And so when FDA look at our data package, it's from everybody. And then and so they would then approve it for the US market. And we would take the same package and then submit it to different countries for their registration and approval as well. So there are some certain countries that different ways that they like to look at data. For example, Japan will want to look at their specific data population. China is the same way. So there are some nuances, but generally you submit all the data you have. And this is really important, especially in rare disease, where we really need all the data package to be seen by everybody.
And I think there's a little bit of flexibility in requiring certain patients from certain geographic areas and ultra-rare diseases, because I think even the regulators understand it's hard to find patients who will qualify for clinical trials. So it's important to have and include the data from across the world.
I think one of the things that's important to remember about the Stop FOP trial is it's an investigator-initiated trial at Amsterdam University Medical Center. And so it is not a trial that's being run by a pharmaceutical company at this point. And that's really the next step. We're hoping that the data that reads out from this study will attract the interest of commercial partner, because for the FDA or anyone else to approve the drug, they would have to really show that there is a company that has the drug and is committed to developing it and manufacturing it and supplying it for FOP. And so that's really the next step for Stop FOP.
Thank you. I think that's the question I wanted to ask, but didn't know what I needed to ask. Thank you.
Yeah. And in that process, I mean, there may be a phase 3 trial after this, so. Lori?
But what about trials that are only run in other countries or in one site and not in the United States? What happens? Not all the trials are run globally, correct?
Right now, every trial, except for Stop FOP, has a global presence. So except for, I guess I should say, except for rapamycin in Japan, and I think none of us know, I think every one of us has tried to send emails to find out what's happening over there. But right now, all of the trials that are represented up here have some more than one country experience.
And by the way, that was a great question. That's why I asked my real question is about palovarotene. Since it's an approved drug, and we believe likely that there are going to be multiple therapies to treat FOP depending on the individual and so many other variables, could the pharmaceutical companies look at palovarotene and see what the interactions are, or just like you do with other drugs that can be taken along the trial?
I'll take that. So Ipsen, we are very fortunate that we're actually developing the two compounds for FOP. So palovarotene, as you know, was approved last year in August. And so we definitely are interested in continuing to look at palovarotene. And also, and this is a plug for the registry, is to really then look at the long-term efficacy and safety, and this is over 10 years for palovarotene in real world. We have in our company looked at the interaction in terms of safety and also efficacy in mouse models, so that we could show that there is no additional safety signals from the combination of both. Right now, we're concentrating on getting fidrisertib, so it's not that hard, across the line to see whether it's safe. And I think whether we would then be able to use it in a combination, I think Bob put it really well, is that this is something that we will have to think about going the future, in that maybe if fidrisertib, which is a single dose every day, is effective, we could then potentially add palovarotene when we have an episode of flare-up. So those are definitely things that we think about, but we've done at least the animal studies to support that.
Question following that then. Are you looking at the people who came from if there's any differences in the people that came from and washed out of the palovarotene trial and then moved to the FOP trial? Because is there a difference if you weren't on the trial and now you are?
So indeed, we did include patients who had previously participated in the MOVE trial. And as you said, we had also asked them to wash out of palovarotene before they come into the Falcon trial. And so we definitely will be looking at those, and that is definitely a question that our regulatory bodies are very interested in.
So just a quick comment on that. I think many of us and patients, when they come to see us, they talk about potential for combination therapy. But if you look at all of the other diseases that use combination therapy, you have to figure out what each individual drug does first, right? And so I know that sometimes people can say it's very frustrating that, you know, I have to come off of a medication or I have to come off of something. But if you go through the whole process and do a clinical study or a clinical trial and you can't figure out at the end whether it's effective or not, that's a problem, right? So all of the studies you'll see, you know, they will have exclusions, they will have medications, you know, some of them will be off-label medications, some of them will obviously be other investigational investigational agents. But you have to do the singles first. And then once we figure that out, then we can go back and say, here's one that hits this mechanism, here's one that hits the other mechanism. Then we look at the combination therapies.
Other questions in the room? If not, I've got Tiffany's going that way. Okay, I do want to ask this question, okay, because I'm personally confused, Ed. So the canakinumab, you said it's a study, not a trial, but they are taking canakinumab, so they're taking a drug. Is it new people can't start on canakinumab, or it's the people that are already taking it? Can you help me understand that?
Yep. So then NIH has two definitions. One is a trial, which is basically meaning that when you go and you enroll in that, the team actually says you're going to take drug or placebo, or they're going to provide the medication. A study is basically an observational study, meaning that somebody else provides that, and the role of the team is only to observe and see what's going on. In other words, there's no intervention, there's nothing that is being actually prescribed. In this particular situation, what it is for patients who are going on to canakinumab, or their local physician has decided that canakinumab is potentially appropriate for them, then they can enroll in this observational study. So the team of the study actually does not do any of the management, does not do any of the safety assessments. The only thing that we're doing is doing the radiology and the CT scans and some of the experimental studies to really understand whether it's not.
So make sure I understand. So other people have been prescribing canakinumab to these people, and you're doing the study to say what's happening in the people that are already getting prescribed canakinumab.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Hope and I were very confused, and so I wanted to make sure we understood.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yep.
That's great. Okay, Tiffany.
Hi, Tiffany. I first want to say thank you. This is a dream come true to be having this discussion about which clinical trial is best, and it's just thank you so much for all the support and involvement and investment that you guys have put into our community. So first want to start with that. It kind of gets me pretty emotional. First, I have a couple questions. First one is for Dr. Hsiao. I know that you in the past have been doing a study or a investigational about microbiome for FOP children and their siblings, and I just wondered if you had any updates on that. It's been a little while since I've heard about it.
So Tiffany's question is about the microbiome study. Yes, we have been doing that. That has been going on since 2014. It's just taking a long time to figure out what's going on. So hopefully one of these days we're trying to write it up. So.
We know something's going on. Okay, my question is for about the Hsiao study. Super excited about this and can't wait to hear about Dr. Kaplan's presentation tomorrow. Looking at what, as I understand it, phase 1 is complete, or phase, I guess I'm...
Sorry, Tiffany, can you speak right into the microphone?
Yeah, absolutely. I lowered it maybe too low. The Hsiao study, and I saw in the chart that the phase 1, you're through phase 1, so I guess it's been investigated in other situations and other groups. And so you would be starting this as a phase 2 trial. And what does the timing look like on that? How many people are you trying to enroll? How many sites? Just kind of an overview of what you're looking for.
Yeah, you're correct. So this has been tested in about a little over 1,000 individuals. Some of them were healthy, I think about 57. The rest were patients with various disorders, including cancer for about half of the individuals, and then the rest were inflammatory bowel disease or other inflammatory disorders. And the safety profile was very clean. It has not been tested in patients living with FOP. And when you move into a new disease state for any drug, you always need to be studying safety in the new disease state. It's also never been tested in anyone under the age of 18. The participants in the prior trials were 18 to 85. So that is another type of safety that we will be monitoring very carefully. We do have the clearance from FDA, and prior to Hsiao acquiring the drug, they already had clearance based on preclinical data to go down to age 12, and then it's our job to do all the preclinical data and analysis to see if we can go younger. You were asking how many sites. It's 4 sites in the United States, so we're not quite international yet, but it is part of our plan once we go to the main study, part 2. For part 1, we are enrolling up to 6 patients who have demonstrated that they have had a lot of flare-up activity within the past 6 months, and then another up to 6 for the sodium fluoride PET CT, and that group has to be 15 or older. The flare-up group has to be 12 or older. Did I answer all the questions?
Yeah, next I guess would be timing. This is about to open enrollment?
Enrollment. We do have 1 site that is already okayed to enroll, and that's UCSF, and then the other ones should be coming along over time. We'll see.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, I had 2 questions. So my first question has to do with, I guess, from a patient perspective, when it comes to being in clinical trials, the side effects that can really affect the patients. I know there's, the idea of confidentiality, and so a lot of the times you can't really talk about the side effects with others, only really like when you're documenting everything that, when you're in the trial. So I guess my question was, if there was, if this was something that others have brought up in the past, or if it's something you're looking into, some type of, I don't know, a pool of resources or products that can really help, that other patients have found really help them when it comes to all these side effects. If that was something that you, any of the trials had, yeah, if that makes sense.
So I think your question is, do the companies that are running trials have resources to help people manage the side effects, maybe that have been suggested by other patients? Is that correct, Erin?
Yeah, because, you can't really talk to other patients about what you're, the side effects and everything that you're going through because it is a trial, and there's confidentiality.
I thought I have a loud mouth. Okay. Is there any way that you could create some kind of chat or something? Is there already an app that allows people to communicate anonymously? Because I know, even as moms, we want answers that we can't yet. I mean, we can't look at a registry, we can't look at data and use CRM and trying to figure out a question. It just might be a way that would really help parents and especially the patients with FOP that are on the clinical trials communicate.
I'd be okay taking that one. So I think when someone is not in a clinical trial, having that kind of communication can be super helpful, because I really believe that patients and families notice things that their doctors blow off. So very helpful. When you're in a clinical trial, the tricky part is the suggestibility. So if you are not already noticing something that is happening in you or your child, and you hear about it on social media or through a chat of this sort, that my child has been on X study and started having Y problem, just as humans, that makes us start to look for it. And maybe you identify a very small amount, but it seems much bigger, this sort of thing. So the type of communication that I think might be more helpful would be making sure that your doctor knows, so that your doctor has a chance to address it. And I would even hesitate to have a lot of doctor-to-doctor conversation. When it comes to something that is a severe adverse event, all of the investigators learn about it anyway. So, but we're talking about things that are annoyances and, quality of life, I assume. And those are a big deal. And it is the family that picks it up, or the patient who picks it up. But if it's during a clinical trial, I worry a little bit about integrity of data. I think once the clinical trial is over, that's when this kind of communication can be very helpful.
Well, and the clinical trial would have to be anonymous as well, and multiple, it would have to be something collaborative maybe that was had.
Yeah.
We can talk about that
Yeah.
offline later, because they're talking about it anyway.
Did you have another
Can
question
I-
too, Aaron?
Actually, can I just add to that for a moment? I think what Deb said is absolutely critical. When you're part of the clinical trial, we want to know everything. Like, you have this extra skin tag, you have something else that's going on, you don't feel good that day. That's really critical for a number of reasons. Not only is it to just sort of figure out, what the adverse events are and to help you manage it, because I think, if you report those, but oftentimes those are sort of the early things that we look for, and it's part of the safety monitoring. So just to give you a quick background, if you report something to us on site, if it's severe, we have to tell a number of different people within 24 hours that this is a severe problem. If it's not severe, it's usually in a couple of days, but it is really critical for trying to, the key thing about the trials, I think I had mentioned, is safety. This is really part of the safety monitoring. So we don't want sort of things to be delayed with sort of back chatting in the background and stuff like that, and sort of becoming less clear, is really getting that reporting back to us. And then all of the studies have, I think all of the studies, at least all of the studies I've been involved in, have had mechanisms for supporting the symptomatic management, or sort of managing things that are related to the therapy. If it's not related to the therapy, that's often going to be separate. Like, if you get the flu, that's going to be between you and your doctor and your insurance company. But if you have something related to the therapy, there are mechanisms that are all built into those.
I just want to, point out what you said is really, really important, Dr. Hsiao. If you are in a clinical trial and you are experiencing something, then please let your trial doctor know, because that's how we develop our safety profile, right? We only know what the patients report, and the doctors all put that, even if it's minor, into the database, right? And that's what we look at as a company, and as through our independent data monitoring committees that look at the data as well too, so independent groups that look at the safety. So it's really important to have all that reported to your doctor, to your clinical trial site, so that, again, we can look at all of that information and see if this truly is something that is a side effect.
Even if you don't think it's related.
Exactly.
Even if you don't think it's related.
So even if you get the flu,
Yeah,
please
you
report
have to let us know.
Please report that, because we need to know. So, yeah.
Okay.
And then I guess my next question was, so as far as some drugs being FDA approved, is there, I think a lot of people think, oh, right away the drug is going to be available and I can get it tomorrow. Is there like a ballpark estimate of how long it will take before patients are able to have access to these FDA-approved drugs? I know it's probably different for each trial, but
So once it depends on the country, actually. So in the US, generally after it's approved, it's accessible by prescription. Some of the other countries, for example, Canada, there is more negotiations with their government. So it depends on the country that is approved and when the access will become available. I think one thing that would be really useful is that most companies have what we call a patient support portal that you or your physician can access and ask questions about how can I get access to the medicine, and that will be the best way to understand when it's going to be available. But in the US, it's almost immediate.
okay, thank you so much.
Okay, we're a little over time, but we'll take a few more questions because this is such an important topic. Rico.
So my question is to basically everyone. So not knowing how a pharmaceutical company works, the ultimate goal is to find a cure or a treatment for FOP. But it seems like the clinical trial drugs kind of hit a different target in the main goal of trying to find a cure or a treatment. Has there ever been communication that maybe collectively we hit a home run together, or is it about who crosses the finish line first?
So in drug development in general, the hope is that whatever you're dedicating your time to is going to be helpful. You hope that it will help address everything, but so the inflammation, the flare-ups, the heterotopic ossification, the generalized pain, you're hoping that there is a chance that you're going to address everything, and you realize that you might not. And above all, you're hoping that it's safe. And for those of us who've chosen to go into this, we are working on ones where we have good reason to believe all of the above. But we recognize that until it has been studied, you do not know. And after a drug may be approved, that's when you have the opportunity to look at combinations, which we've talked about before. Until then, the statistical powering of these studies and clarity over what a particular drug is doing will not allow one to look at polypharmacy of unknown new drugs. So you really have to get past that first part. Does that address it?
Yeah, pretty much so. Thanks.
Felicia, I think you'll be the last question today.
Okay, thank you. So this is, it's going to sound specific, but if we could generalize it, it is about safety. So in terms of, for example, a trial in which it started out and it was a pediatric trial and then it was stopped for children, it's obviously it's not a hypothetical when I say, well, now it's been FDA approved, but palovarotene or Sohonos is now approved for children, females specifically, as young as 8. I'm wondering in terms of like safety guardrails, and it might be an FDA kind of a question, but if the trial was stopped for children of this age, how does the drug wind up getting approved for use in children of that age?
So I'll address that. So part of what we talk about is risk-benefit. And so when we started the study, we had planned on, based on our animal data, based on what is known about retinoid acid, because there are other retinoids out there. So we kind of have a good idea what the safety profile is. And so when we designed the study, we try to avoid those signals. And so during the trial, when we saw the premature closure, we then stopped the trial for those that were less than 14. But then we already had data from the younger kids. So when you look at the efficacy and the safety, we want to balance that benefit. So we came to, and the FDA came to the conclusion that for patients, girls and above 8 and boys above 10, which we're thinking would be about 80% of their growth, that would be where you would draw the line. And that is why the approval was for 8-10. But it is important that we continue to track the safety, and that's why we have the registry, which then will allow patients who are now taking commercial medicine to be enrolled in that study, and we will track their growth, their height, all the other things that are long-term safety over time. So exactly, it was approved, but we still need to look at what the long-term sequelae of taking palovarotene long-term. Does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you.
Thank you for the question.
So I just want to say thank you for such an important session. I think, to your point, Scott, it's pretty amazing that we're sitting here and there's this many companies. There are companies that have been in this space and have stepped away for various reasons, but there has been a lot of interest in FOP and in developing drugs for each of you. So we are so grateful to you. We're grateful to the investigators that start their own trials, that do their own studies to check these off-label treatments, to the ICC who watches this and participates this and monitors this. We are just a really blessed community. So thank you that we get to be here and we get to talk about so many clinical trials that are available for our families.